Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voice of Wisdom. With over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, venture capitalist, securities analyst, and advisor, Morty Davis is a Wall Street legend. In addition, Mr. Davis is an outstanding economist and highly articulate, incisive, and very entertaining political analyst and strategist. He's Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through The Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical economic and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis today for a discussion on the news making the headlines is Len Carter. Len is an investment banker, business consultant, and private investor. And now, Mr. Davis and Mr. Carter.
Welcome back. It's great to join you, my cohorts in this podcast, my favorite people in the whole world. I love you all. Thank you for your input. It's always brilliant. And even when you seem excessively critical or even mean, I spend some time thinking about what you say, and you're all on target to a certain extent. There's wisdom in what you suggest, even if you disagree with me, and it helps me broaden my views and understand the situation better, the world better, and that's the way we all should be. Receptive to other people's opinions and not discount them immediately. So without further ado, let's get started on this week's exciting podcast. I'm delighted that we have Len Carter joining us once again. I feel bad imposing on his time, but it's really imperative for me because he makes for such a great addition to the knowledge and wisdom of this weekly discussion. As I mentioned before, he's graduated at the top of his class in every major college and university in the United States. First, Cornell University, a major, highly regarded, excellent Ivy League college. Then he graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. Then Harvard Business School, where he graduated at the top of his class again. It's the same great school of business knowledge and learning, the greatest, in my view, in the whole United States, indeed the whole world. And he graduated with honors at the top of his class, and then went on to take a job with a leading consulting firm, consultant to the major corporations and government agencies.
McKinsey and Company.
McKinsey and Company, the number one consulting company in the United States and indeed the whole world. And finally, his attendance at the great university in San Francisco that has produced more high-tech geniuses and billionaires than any other institution of learning in the United States or indeed the entire world. So welcome back,
Thank you,
Leonard.
Good
Thank
to be
you
here.
for joining us. And we really appreciate, I especially appreciate, the wisdom that you add to this podcast of the weekly events, which discusses the headlines of the week, the civics of the week. So without further ado, let's get on with the, I'd like to say, uplifting events of the week, but they're hardly uplifting. The only thing that makes the high headlines is depressing news, tragedies, killings, pandemics, fires, every kind of negative event, shootings at high schools and elementary schools of innocent children and innocent civilians throughout the United States. It's really enough to, even if you're in a good mood, to impose a depression on you if you're normal. So let's get on with the news of the week.
Before we jump into the bad news, why don't we talk about the good news?
The good news is to overcome,
writing your book to try to offset some of the bad news that we're about to discuss.
I used to, when I was younger, spend a lot of time being depressed about life in general, about the week's events, and particularly, and just the world as it is in so many ways that are horrible when it should be great love between all of our fellow human beings. So inevitably what we discuss are the headlines, because that's what makes the front pages of the various media outlets, newspapers, magazines, and which interrupts all our programs, network TV or channel, not channel,
Cable TV.
Cable TV during the week. There's hardly ever, I've never seen one, where wonderful news is announced on the front page or news interrupted on your cable channel to say some young child that start out with a poor beginning in life, flunking all his courses, and now it's graduated with all kind of honors and degrees and so forth. Those are uplifting and encouraging and give us all hope for doing better, no matter how poorly we seem to be doing or what poor start we had. So without further ado, let's jump into the week's news. Jump in, as I use it advisedly, because it's enough to make you jump off the top of the Empire State Building or whatever. It's all the hurricanes and fires and multiple mass slaughters of innocent children at high schools, colleges, elementary schools, young kids and their teachers. It's unbelievable that we live in a country that tolerates this kind of recurrent, tragic behavior, heinous behavior. So don't jump, but we do have to jump forward to the week's news.
Instead of jump to buy the book.
Right.
And if you don't like it, you can even get 2 times your money back.
I spent 12 years in conjunction with my own experience, in response to my own experience, where I was always depressed, and then I ran across an encouraging, uplifting book by a Catholic bishop, Norman Vincent Peale. And by getting me to adopt the positive thinking that his guidance, his book proposes, it changed my life. And as a consequence, that book, along with a very excellent book by Dale Carnegie, who was likewise a very inspirational writer and wrote a book on achieving happiness called Stop Worrying and Start Living. And those 2 books inspired me to try to have the same effect on my family, my children, my friends, my contemporaries, my everyday neighbors and fellow Americans. So I spent 12 years researching and recording all the wisdom of these people, these documents since the beginning of civilization. The biblical notes that encourage healthy living, the biblical scholars, the great philosophers, all the way back to the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle and Freud in Germany, the father of psychoanalysis and psychology, all of which has taken me out of this tendency to be depressed by the news, in spite of the heinous reporting every week. So, Len, why don't we move on?
Okay.
And the reason I have the book here in front of me, I spent 12 years researching and copying down every scholar, every biblical reference, every philosopher since the beginning of time that discussed this subject, all the way back to the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle, up to modern day Freud, the father of psychology and psychiatry. It attempts to capture all of this knowledge that I could gather in 12 years, and was still in the process of hopefully gathering even additional uplifting and supporting happiness, encouraging behavior. Till one day, after 12 years of ceaseless work of this kind, where I recorded all these ideas, biblical ideas, and biblical scholars have commented, and great philosophers like, going back to the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle, all up to the recent times of Dale Carnegie, who wrote Stop Worrying and Start Living, a brilliant treatise on how to be happy no matter what. And Freud again, the modern teacher of philosophy, of psychiatry and psychiatry, to help us live happier, uplifted lives.
Okay.
So the reason I have the book in front of me here is as we do the program each week, it inevitably leads to depression. So this book is front and center on your screen, telling you that this is the best investment you could ever make, or the best gift you could ever give a friend or a loved one to improve the quality of your life. The contentment and happiness that life can provide and should provide, especially since God told us He made us in His image. That in itself should make you walk your head with your head uplifted and learn from all of this. And it was after 12 years I was still gathering this fabulous amount of wisdom and knowledge since the beginning, accumulated since the beginning of civilization, whereupon my daughter picked it up one day and said, "Daddy, I just read your book on happiness, and it's terrific. Why don't you publish it?" And I said, "I will, but I want to get some more ideas." And she said, "It's fabulous as it is. Publish it." But I said, "I want to wait a couple more years. I still want to gather some more." So she, who's written a number of very popular books on advice of living, marriage, everything, joined me over the next 2 years to make sure I finally published it. And I therefore made her a co-author because she added so many additional good ideas. So this is the end product. And because my podcast inevitably, as it does to me, induces depression and disappointment and just a downer. So I wanted you to be aware of this book that can help you, as it has helped me, to live a much better, fulfilling, and encouraging, what's the word I always use?
Contentment.
Contented life. Not one when you're on drugs and you seem to be happiest and laughing and joking, and the next day, or after the effect wears off, you're back to your misery or worse, and you have the hangover and the headaches that the liquor or the beer or the drugs induce. So I put it here as a way for you to deal with the depressing program that I have you join me every week. You're my favorite people. You're my cohorts that help to make this podcast really worthwhile and terrific. Your knowledge, your wisdom, your input, your notes to me are fabulous. Thank you. So welcome back.
Thank you, Morty. So let's we can jump into the depressing headlines and news of the week. You know, this I was thinking because this is President's Week.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it will even means even more that we'll be talking about what we frequently talk about, the president. But so let's start off in Washington. It seems like we've had this discussion a few times since I've been on the show, and that's the topic of government shutdown. It seems like in the last few years or last few administrations, like shutdowns are now fairly commonplace. And when the first time I think in the first Trump administration, when there was a shutdown because the two sides couldn't come to terms on some continuing resolution to, keep the government funded. There was a lot of panic in the markets and in the world over what's going to happen, and then it was resolved, and then there was another one, and then that was resolved, and then there was another one, and another one. So I think this is just in this last year, the first year of the second Trump administration. I think this is the third shutdown. Although this time it's a partial shutdown because most of the government is funded through September from the last agreement back in September, October, when we had the longest shutdown ever. This time the issue is over funding for Department of Homeland Security, and the Democrats are insisting upon certain overhauls and changes to how the DHS works and operates and conducts itself. So let's, particularly in light of what's happened in Minneapolis over the last month or so, with ICE and the shootings and the protests and everything. So the core issue is, I guess, behavior of ICE, and in particular, there's two things that the Democrats are insisting upon. One, to see what your thoughts are. One is ICE should wear body camera, and ICE should not wear masks. So do you think that those two demands, are reasonable and are worth holding out for, rather?
I think they're very reasonable. Instead of their carrying guns, ICE, they should have videos of their behavior and try to be supportive of keeping the peace and working with the police to make for more stable, I like to use the word loving society, but a neighborly society. I believe that ICE, instead of being belligerent, should be a partner with the police, and the police should be a partner with ISIS.
So
to make a better safety for all of this.
You don't think ICE should be armed at all? No guns?
No. So
what happens if someone threatens their life? They shouldn't have the ability to, defend. I mean, police are armed. Why shouldn't ICE be armed?
Well, they should be cooperative with the police.
Right.
And if somebody...
But they can't always be... If ICE is doing, conducting some, for lack of a better word, raid on somewhere, they can't always have the police. There's not enough police. Like Minneapolis, I think there's only 600 police, and there were thousands of ICE agents. So they can't work with the police on every single, that they...
Well, we shouldn't have the regular recurrence of the ICE personnel pulling guns or running over, untried, in the sense that there are accusations against some Americans, not even immigrants, and are taken under arrest without any trial or any opportunity to defend themselves. That's never been American. Americans always had the opportunity before they were arrested and put behind bars to have a trial and to have a lawyer represent them and show why they just shouldn't be put behind bars because somebody has the inclination to do that. So what I'm advocating is we all want the same goal, a safer society, and to the extent ISIS and the police can help each other to achieve that, that's a wonderful thing. It shouldn't be one that arrests people, U.S. citizens, with no evidence that they've done anything wrong, merely on the basis of that's the purpose of having cameras.
Yeah, no, I think the cameras are a good idea because as we've seen from even operations where there were cameras, people have different interpretations of what happened. And fortunately, when you have a camera, at least what's on the camera in terms of audio and video is what happened. It can be interpreted then and in different ways, but at least it's some objective, measure of what happened. So, because before that, I mean, they were saying a lot of times, at least in other police operations, if there was a shooting and a killing where a suspect, was on pursuit and, fled and, then there was a shootout and died, the main person to tell the story of what happened from the other side is dead. So then it just becomes the shooter, the police, and a dead person. So then you can't argue with what the police is saying, or you can, but it's one-sided. At least with the body cams, there's a recorded history of what's happening. So I think that's a good idea.
I was very impressed when the first year I went to Harvard Business School. I don't know if they still do it. They showed us a classical old Japanese film where there's some kind of murder or killing in the forest. And there's pictures of it. And then they asked people who were there to describe what happened. And everyone who described it, you could see the film and see how those were accurate descriptions. So it pointed out to the students, because a lot of them were just out of high school, never had any real-life experience. So if somebody wanted a raise, they said, give them a raise. They didn't have any frame of reference. Now you got to have 2 years of work experience, so at least you're acquainted somewhat of the real world. But that was such an incisive movie, because what it says is there's hardly ever a decisive interpretation of a film that everybody would agree to. It depends on where you're standing, what your beliefs were in general before it happened, with respect to the victim or the shooter. And it was brilliant. So I'm sorry they don't show it all the time at every class in every university, because it really delivers a wonderful message that needs to be understood. Even with cameras,
Yep.
You're saying you're seeing it from a different angle. You're coming at it with a different philosophy. You're supportive of ISIS. Others are against ISIS. So the same event is considered they did the right thing, and the other is considered That's horrendous. They're shooting Americans for no reason at all.
How about the argument, on the masks? People say that ICE, the argument for ICE to have masks is that, they're frequently the target of threats, intimidation, and if they're masked, then at least then they're safer. Their family might be safer.
Yeah.
That's an argument. I'm not sure how you weigh that against the other argument, which is when people are masked, they tend to sometimes behave differently than when they're not masked. So, but you would still argue to remove the masks for, like, police don't have masks.
Yeah. I think
Do you think
we have lots of evidence that some people, even who are legitimately wrong and even criminal, go after the person that arrested them or the judge that
right,
put them in jail.
right,
There have been a number of American judges
yes,
that did nothing more than had a trial and send somebody off to jail, and they were killed, or members of the family were killed. So there's no reason to have masks. I mean, unless it's, what do you call it? What holiday?
Halloween.
Halloween, right.
Or Purim coming up. So
Yeah.
This shutdown affects TSA. ICE is funded from the big beautiful bill over the summer, so that's ICE has funding. I believe.
What does TSA stand?
The airport security workers.
Right.
I believe that the air traffic controllers this time are still being paid. So what happened is, remember the last time, air traffic was out, TSA was out, so it really caused, it started to, over time, because the shutdown lasted over a month, I think, right, that it really started to affect air travel. And then the Secretary of
It was dangerous,
Then the Secretary of Transportation, Mr. Duffy, said to the airlines, because of the danger in air traffic controllers calling in sick or being too stressed to work or whatever was the case, airlines now had to, back then, cut flights. And so as soon as that happened and people started to really be inconvenienced, then you saw the parties come to the table and it was resolved relatively quickly. So I'm wondering, what do you think that this time, the Congress is on recess during this week, President's Week, so they're not even talking about anything till next week. So we'll already be a week into it next week. And then, do you see this one just dragging out for weeks and weeks and weeks until eventually there's enough stress and agitation and problems in, transportation that people eventually start to complain enough that get their congressmen and women to negotiate and come to some terms? Because I think it might even take longer this time because, as I said, air traffic is still being paid. So in this case, it's just the people that run the security, the X-ray machines and the baggage screening and all that. So eventually, I guess, the Department of Transportation could say to the airlines, it's unsafe to fly because our TSA workers are too overworked and underpaid to safely screen luggage. So now you have to start cutting flights again. And once that happens, then I could see some movement. But until then, I think this is just going to be two sides digging their heels in like it was last time.
It's remarkable and disappointing that it's come to this, because in all the years while I was growing up, we never had that. We had lots of disagreements
Right.
between Democrats
But no one
and
wanted to
Republicans.
shut down the government.
Yeah.
So they came to terms.
Yeah, we had lots of disagreements, but we didn't have the kind of stalemates.
Right.
And it was more related to the law and what's right and what's wrong, but never this anger at each other.
And blame.
Yeah, well,
Blame. I mean, both sides just say, it's not our fault. It's the other side's fault.
Yeah, they want to punish the other side, right?
Right.
That's really remarkable in a country where we're all on the same side. We all want peace and less danger and less harm to citizens. We all have the same objectives, and now it's become so partisan that it's almost like the what do you call it? The ISIS people, the Shiites. What's the religion?
Islam.
Islam, where they within the same religion. I mean, we Jews have lots of fights. We have anger. There's families that don't talk to each other. We have all kind of things. We never have anybody killing a fellow religionist, not Christian, not Catholic, not Protestants, not any other religion kills because they disagree. And here the Shiites and the Sunnis are forever killing each other because they disagree about who's the correct follower of Muhammad's descendants. That says something about the hopelessness of straightening out Muslim behavior, because if they kill their own, it's not surprising that they'd kill Americans, certainly not Israelis. They just don't want to get along. They don't want to settle anything.
So, let's, speaking of the, armed people and guns, we've talked many times about, the role and impact that guns have had in our country. We see this week the role of guns and the impact that they've had in our world, often not so good. We see that this week the trial of Colin Gray, the father of a teenager who was responsible for last year or 2024 shooting at Appalachia High in Georgia, where with an AR-15, which they say was given to the teenager by the father, committed the mass shooting at the high school. The father now is on trial, for criminally having some liability for this shooting because he supposedly gave the AR-15, the rifle, the son. They gave the AR-15 rifle to the son. So, is this do you see this a question of the son being, or the father being punished for the sins of his son? We talk about sons being punished for the sins of their fathers. Here's a flip of that. Is the father being punished for the sins of his son, or does the son have, his father, parents, do they have some legal and criminal responsibility for how they raise a child, and for not, seeing the instability or mental illness that the son obviously had to commit something like this? What do
I
you
think
think?
the Old Testament says at some point the sins of the father will be visited on the sons. And, fathers that buy their kids guns without making sure that they're responsible. First of all, why kids need guns is terrible. Society in general.
Not just a gun. This is an AR-15. This is not a BB gun or a single rifle to shoot a deer or something. Right. This is an AR-15.
They're war military.
Automatic weapon.
Right.
Shoots a lot of bullets at once.
Military weapons to kill as many as they can as fast as you can. So we've had this discussion lots of times. The United States has made it that anybody could own a gun and it's legal. And I think that's one of the worst part of the Constitution. They never realized the writers of the Constitution. They were thinking just to protect the government against the government takeover of the people, that the people should have availability of protection in the form of guns so the government can't do that to them. First of all, it doesn't work anymore because in those days, the Americans that were just hardly armed had the same dangerous weapons as the British. Today, even if every single American has a gun, the government has cannons and tanks and airplanes and whatnot, atom bombs. So it's not the same. I think it was put there in anticipation of protecting democracy, but it's turned out to be a vehicle for destroying life in America. That any nobody could go into a kid's school, kids under 5, under 7, and shoot up the place, shoot up kids that had no guilt, have done nothing wrong, shoot up the teachers. It's horrendous. But it's in the Constitution, and those that hold that the Constitution is inviolable, it's perfect. A guy like Scalia, who was considered a great Supreme Court judge, said you must read the Constitution as it is written. Even the Bible, the Old Testament says an eye for an eye, has evolved to the point where it's not an eye for an eye, but you can substitute some equivalent, although I don't know what's the equivalent of an eye, but, ways to deal with it that is not as vicious as is, has more humanity. So why we continue to advocate that, and it's the power of the NRA, National Rifle Association, because like everything else in America, anything that has big profits can win out over things that are sensible.
So, I mean, if in most states, it's not legal for a teenager to own a gun. So if a parent, just like it's not legal for teenagers to drink, it's not legal for teenagers to take drug, or even if it's legal in marijuana in states where it's legal, it's usually at age 21. Drinking is 21. So if a parent gives an underage child, drugs or alcohol or a gun, they're not legally allowed to do that. So I would say in that case, it's clear that a parent should be liable for that. It's a little murkier when the question is, should they have, you're allowed to own a knife. So does a parent have a legal obligation to ensure that their teenage child is stable enough to have a knife? And if they don't, if they commit a crime with the knife, are the parents liable for that because they somehow should have seen that? Is that like a child abuse, like an obligation, a criminal act by not seeing somehow into the future that your child is going to do something bad with this knife and therefore it's your fault. So it's tough. I'm not sure. I don't know how this one's going to play out. I think because it's such a heinous instance, I think it's not out of the question that the father's going to be found guilty because of what the nature of what the teenage son did, in shooting the high school students. And people like to blame people. People like to have someone to blame.
Unfortunately,
beyond just the shooter.
Unfortunately, in human activity and human behavior, there's hardly any law that's perfect. So to the extent you make it stricter, it could be unfair. To the extent you don't make it strict enough, it makes it seem tolerable, and it's definitely something that the parent has a responsibility to understand the risks. So a knife is dangerous, but you can't do mass slaughter with a knife. Rarely.
But what would happen if the child stabs someone?
Well,
is the parent responsible for that stabbing? It doesn't have to be a 50-person mass shooting. It's still a murder.
Yeah, even one person. To some extent, we're responsible for the behavior of our children in that we bring them up and we're supposed to convey values and make sure that they live up to those values.
But that always doesn't happen, right? How many well-intentioned or very, what we would say, good parents, somehow their kids just aren't well behaved? I mean, is that the parents? Is that really the parent? Where does that free will in the kids come
those
in?
aren't good. Those aren't, as you put it, good intentions parents. Those are stupid parents, because everything has consequences. And when you give your kids weapons, depending on the nature of the weapons, you're guilty if you don't make sure that they're trained to, keep them responsibly, locked up, even their own families. Child deaths are overwhelmingly done by members of their own family that somehow got a hold of a gun that wasn't properly.
Yeah. You know, in fact, what I could make a case for in terms of the father's guilt is child endangerment, right? Parents, if a parent doesn't feed or clothe a kid, their child, that's parental abuse. That's child abuse,
Yeah.
right? If they leave the house with the kid roaming around, that's child abuse. They could be arrested for that. It's a crime. You know, child endangerment is a crime. So I guess I could argue that giving a teenager an AR-15 is a form of child endangerment, right? Like you wouldn't give a 5-year-old a sharp knife. That's child endangerment. And you know, you could and should be, you know, arrested, or you know, child services comes in and takes kids away from homes when there's abuse, parental abuse. So, and a lot of it's because of, you know, endangering the welfare of a child is a crime. So now that I think about it, I guess I could, if I were the DA in Appalachia or Winder, Georgia, I would bring a case on against the father based on child endangerment. But
You know, I worked a summer job between my first and second year at Harvard Business School for Carl M. Lowe Broads. That was a Wall Street firm. I worked in the research department. And one of the top guys in the research department, his name was Lindsay. He came from a very wealthy family. And when Lindbergh's kid, at that time a very famous case, Lindbergh his kid was kidnapped and killed. This father, Lindsay, his father owned the town. He had the mill, textile mill. Everybody in the town in New Hampshire worked for him. They lived in his housing. They were provided food by him. He was like the king who he could have access to the bride the first night even before the groom, right? I mean, it was that powerful. So when Lindsay's kid was kidnapped and killed, he had Lindsay and his sister, the two children. He hired bodyguards around the clock, with just plain not machine guns or multiple shooters, but just simple guns, 24/7, figuring he wants them safe from kidnapping. So he says, one time, one of the guards, one of the security guards, was watching over the kids, and he was cleaning his gun, didn't realize it was loaded, and he released a bullet and killed his sister. And he says, as a result of that, his father was so successful and such a big person, became a total alcoholic, never worked again in his life. His life was ruined, and the mother wound up in an insane asylum. So here, the intentions were good, but the outcome was so terrible. He says it changed his life, his whole family's life. You know, it doesn't matter even if your intentions are right.
Yep.
You gotta.
Road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, right. You gotta be aware of the consequences of any behavior
Yeah.
you tolerate. You know what they say? Insanity is inherited.
Mm-hmm.
You get it from your parents. You get it? No, you get it from your kids.
Yeah.
Parents go crazy from their kids.
So that's
We can't make the world perfect as we would like, but certainly we can take actions that are reasonable. We can't all hire private security for our kids and think we're making them safer when, in fact, it turned out that was devastating.
yeah. I mean, same thing
You could mean to do well
with having a firearm in a house to protect your family, only to have it appropriately used by a young child who
you didn't lock it up properly. In Australia, they had one mass shooting in '95. They made people, to get a gun, had to take under police jurisdiction for a year, take training, shooting lessons, storing their gun, and they didn't have another event like that from 1995 till like 2025. So it can be done, and I can't be perfect because in 25 they did have. But here we have no insistence on getting a license for a gun, that you have to be trained to store it, and if you didn't store it properly and they find out, you could go to jail.
Right.
Before
maybe the rules should be different, even if you have young children in the house.
Yeah.
So you can, when you apply for a permit.
Absolutely.
So, well, all right, we are out of time, but that was an interesting discussion.
When we're having fun, we always run out of time.
We will.
Anyway, thank you for joining us this week and every other week. I love you guys. I wish you everything wonderful, for you and all your loved ones. Every day of your life should be better than the day before, unto perpetuity, until the end of time. God bless you. I love you. And I look forward to be back with you next Wednesday, 6:30. God bless you. Bye.